Welcome to the Energy Capital Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Lewin. Texas is number one for a lot of things: wind, utility scale solar, oil and gas production in the United States anyway. Texas is also the number one state for weather-related power outages, with nearly 50% more outages over the last 25 years than even California. Just in the last 4 years, we've had Winter Storm Uri in 2021, the ice storm in central Texas in 2023, the derecho and Hurricane Beryl in 2024. But the frequency and duration of power outages can be managed and reduced through many strategies. One of the quickest and most effective ways to lessen the impact of outages is to have widespread on-site backup power, sometimes also referred to as microgrids. Interconnected resources like solar panels, gas generators, and batteries that connect directly to homes, businesses, hospitals, critical facilities of all kinds, allowing them to operate independently from the grid. My guest this week is Jana Gerber, president of Microgrid North America at Schneider Electric. Schneider's a massive company with over 150,000 employees worldwide. Odds are you've got one of their products in your home, but you probably don't know it. They make all sorts of equipment, and they are a leader in microgrids. Jana's been with Schneider for 20 years and understands the business of backup power as well as anyone out there. During the interview, Jana explained how Schneider's microgrids work, how the role of the consumer on the grid is evolving away from merely being a passive recipient of power. We talked about the financing methods needed to get microgrid projects off the ground, the challenges in scaling microgrids, the value of resilience, and much, much more. This episode is available to our paid subscribers with a free preview open to all listeners. To access the full episode, please visit douglewin.com, where you can sign up for a free trial, a monthly subscription, or an annual subscription. Jana Gerber, welcome to the Energy Capital Podcast.
Thank you so much, Doug, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks for being with me on this. I'm really excited to talk to you. Schneider obviously has a huge role in the energy world, and particularly related to microgrids, which we'll get into in some depth today. But why don't we just start out, if you can, just tell folks a little about your role at Schneider and what Schneider Electric does.
Yeah, I'll start with a little bit about Schneider Electric. So sometimes we often say Schneider's probably the biggest company you haven't heard of, but we are working to change the world. Our mission is to be our customers' digital partner in sustainability and efficiency. And that means we want to collectively tackle climate change and challenge as fast and effectively as possible. So as we think about it, it's about optimizing all the way from the grid to the plug, and that covers both between supply and demand. And how do you digitize that system so you can efficiently handle the flows between the grid and energy sources that we'll talk about more today with distributed energy resources like solar panels, batteries, and even electric vehicles. So my role at Schneider Electric is I'm the North American president of our microgrid business. I've been at Schneider Electric for over 23 years and had various roles, but always continuously focused on helping our customers with solutions and solving their energy challenges.
Awesome. Yeah, as listeners of the pod will know, we talk a lot about microgrids here. I think that they are an absolutely key solution because they check so many boxes: resiliency, reliability, affordability, sustainability, kind of all those boxes and more. So you play a role nationally and even across North America, but you're based here in the great state of Texas and Dallas, which is awesome. So we obviously have listeners that are into this sort of stuff and pretty savvy on these topics. But we also have, look, in especially in Texas, with as many outages and extreme weather events as we've had, there's a whole lot of people that aren't energy experts that are also interested in this. So let's start with kind of just a general definition. What is a microgrid? What are distributed energy resources? Why do they matter?
Yeah, so like you said, I'm in Dallas, and I'm going to start with a very basic overview of what a microgrid is, and then we can get a little bit more detailed on it. But I live in, like you said, Dallas, Texas, and I was here during Storm Uri, or as I like to call it, Snowmageddon. And so we had, the power outages and brownouts. And in my Facebook chat for my neighborhood, a lot of the neighbors in that area have solar. And they'd say, well, I have solar. I should still have power during the outages. And I think when those of us in the energy industry understand why, but it's not as clear to many others that when the grid goes down, you don't want to be backfeeding any sort of power sources onto the grid that could allow for those who are working on it to be harmed. So what a microgrid does is really takes that opportunity to put a hard stop at the source of that, at the meter, really, and we focus on behind the meter microgrids, and allows for another power system to be created behind the meter when the grid is down, creating that resiliency and power production. So similar to a generator, I guess, if you will. And many people have generators on their homes or businesses. But what a microgrid does, and I think you said it well, Doug, is allows for those stacks of different value propositions. So yes, it provides resiliency, but it also creates sustainability through the renewable sources that it leverages, whether that be solar, battery, it could be wind. We've done projects with methane gas. We've done projects with fuel cells. It could be any sort of system that helps to create that power behind the meter. And what we're seeing really is, from a kind of elevating that storyline a little bit, is that the energy landscape is really transforming. It's been very one directional in the past, but when a microgrid is operating in conjunction with the grid, it allows for that ability to share power back to the grid as well, or help to reduce some of those peaks and help with tariff management. So microgrids have also that side on the energy cost elements and helping with energy cost and energy certainty moving forward, especially in a time when energy costs are escalating and all these outages are causing implications and costs, and that cost has to be shared through some group of people, including the utilities and other the states.
So you guys have recently launched Schneider Home, and we're going to come back to that and talk about the residential side. But for now, let's talk on the larger side. Can you talk about some of the projects you've done for larger customers? And specifically, Jana, I'm interested in kind of the mix of technologies. You started talking about that a little bit. There's some that'll have wind or some that'll have fuel cells. But what are some of the more kind of typical arrangements? And part of my reason in wanting to ask this is there's a lot of discussion in Texas right now. There was money allocated during the last legislative session, or supposed to be allocated. As we will get into this in some of the articles I write. I can put a link in the show notes if folks want to know more about that. But there was supposed to be $1.8 billion for microgrids at critical facilities, hospitals, nursing homes, fire departments. Texas just been through Hurricane Beryl. You mentioned Winter Storm Uri. We know that there's going to be a next major event, and it really is imperative that any facility like a nursing home or assisted living center, a dialysis center, right? Dialysis centers during Winter Storm Uri, half of them didn't have power. People who depend on that machinery literally for their lives were unable to get treatment. We have the technology to do that. So can you talk a little bit about where you've deployed and what does that mix of technologies look like?
Yeah, so at Schneider Electric, we've been in the microgrid space for over a decade. We've deployed over 350 projects across the US. And these range in different sizes and different types of facilities. But a few that I would mention first off is we've worked a lot with Montgomery County, which is outside of DC, Washington, DC. And in that case, they've done different projects across their county for emergency management requirements, whether that be their public safety building, their correctional facility, animal shelters, all sorts of fun critical infrastructure in their facility. But most recently, they received grants for electric buses. And one of the things that they found was when they went to go say, okay, well, now I need to power my electric buses and charge them, the ability for the utility to provide that power immediately was challenged. So they turned to a microgrid, and specifically an energy as a service contract, to help them create a 100% renewable energy microgrid solution that now is available to charge their bus fleets. Overall, it reduces lifetime emissions by over 62% and helps with our greenhouse gas emissions as well. That was their first project with Brookville Bus Depot, and they're actually moving on to their second here with one of their other facilities. So that's kind of one piece we're seeing, and that was primarily a solar, fuel cell, and battery energy storage solution that we did at that site. Another kind of critical facility is obviously our Department of Defense facilities. And so hopefully everybody on the listening to the podcast has seen Top Gun or Maverick, but Miramar out in San Diego, California is actually also a microgrid and home to 15,000 service members and their family. And so they, back in 2011, were hit by some of the early shutdowns and really came to understand how fragile the power system can be and how important our national security is for them to be up and running. So they looked to deploy a large-scale renewable energy system for all those critical facilities, as well as their flight line. And so with that one is actually a solar, and in that case, there's a landfill not too far away, and they're able to port in that landfill gas to help to add to the capacity and the ability to create an islanded solution if the grid is down. I think another piece on Miramar that's really interesting is that, it is a large power producer now with the microgrid on site. And so in August of 2020, there was a real critical time in the utility, and the utility actually asked the base to power up and start to spin up the microgrid to help to eliminate load onto that branch, allowing homes to stay powered during that critical time. So not only can it help with the resiliency of the site and behind the meter, but it can also help to create more capacity on top of the grid.
Yeah, exactly. So like, I was saying a few minutes ago with checking all those boxes, right? The way I like to sort of define this is resiliency is when you do have that kind of extreme, whether it's a heat wave, hurricane, winter freeze, whatever it might be, wildfire. I think we're going to see more and more shutoffs in advance of wildfire conditions. That's your resiliency. It adds to reliability, because usually in markets, they talk about that as resource adequacy. Do you have enough supply to meet demand? Well, if you're adding supply in these smaller amounts distributed throughout the grid, that is still supply. Now, on the affordability piece, this is really interesting, right? Because usually if you're a military base or a county emergency operations center, in the past, and tell me if I'm wrong, you've been in this business a long time, but I think the way people used to think about this was you get a diesel generator. Like that's sort of the high speed, low drag. Like we'll get a diesel generator. Of course, the problem with that is you have to maintain that diesel generator. It doesn't run very often, so you have to test it. You can't just keep the diesel there forever. You have to replace the diesel and bring in new. It's like all these upkeep problems, and it's just an expense, right? It's not like with a solar storage or solar storage gas or all these different configurations you just described and more, which can actually be producing power throughout the year and then actually paying back some of the costs. So if you want to talk a little bit more about that, and I'm also interested in your thoughts on Texas and where this can actually, like, where you gave some examples from Maryland and California. Are we seeing this happen in Texas, and what are some of the great use cases? Thank you for listening to this free preview of the Energy Capital podcast. You can access the entire episode as well as the Texas Energy and Power newsletter archives at douglewin.com. That's DOUGLEWIN.com. You'll also be able to attend paid subscriber-only chats, and you'll receive full access to all of the Texas Grid roundups and reading and podcast picks. Please check it out, and thank you for listening.